TrueStory Vibes warmly welcomes all our beloved listeners. We're so glad to see you again in our familiar time slot.
Today,
TrueStory Vibes brings you a brand new story, one that we hope will touch your heart and stay with you. As you listen, feel free to leave a comment sharing the quote or moment that left the deepest impression on you. Wishing you a wonderful and meaningful listening experience. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through the silver maples lining Maple Creek Road, painting dappled shadows on the cracked asphalt. A soft breeze carried the scent of freshly turned earth and wildflowers drifting from the Walker family's 30-acre farm. Children's laughter echoed as a group of 5 raced barefoot down the shoulder, playing impromptu tag between the maple trunks. Their shouts, bright, carefree, spoke of a rural innocence that city dwellers could only dream of. At the edge of the field, where the paved road gave way to gravel, elderly couple James and Mary Walker ambled side by side. James, wearing a well-worn baseball cap that bore the faded Cedar Ridge logo, led the way with a gentle stoop of his shoulders. Though 72 years had smoothed his once sturdy frame, his blue eyes still shone with curiosity. Mary, 2 years his junior, matched his pace gracefully, her gray-streaked hair tucked under a straw sun hat and her wraparound sunglasses reflecting the golden light. "Look at them, Jim," Mary murmured, nodding toward the children as they darted in and out of sunbeams. "Reminds me of when our grandkids used to visit. They'd pull up on their scooters and never want to leave the porch." James smiled, adjusting the brim of his cap. "That they did. Henry used to pretend our Maple Grove was a pirate's island. He'd charge me gold pieces, really quarters, to cross the bridge we made from old boards." They paused at a wire fence, overlooking the silver maples planted a generation ago by James's own grandfather. Each trunk bore rings of age, some narrow, some wide, evidence of seasons past. Droughts endured, storms weathered. Beneath the branches, sap buckets hung in neat rows, early drips of sap promising the season's first batch of Walker's silver maple syrup. Mary pointed to a weathered wooden sign, its letters hand-painted years before. Walker Family Farm, since 1925. She placed a hand over the sign, as though greeting an old friend. "Hard to believe my grandmother planted this first tree nearly a century ago." "I miss her cooking," James said quietly. "That old maple glazed ham she used to make every Thanksgiving. Nothing's tasted quite the same since." They continued along the fence line until a narrow dirt track branched off toward the pond. A heron lifted off with a slow flap of gray wings, startled by their approach. Cricket song and farm machinery hummed in the distance, neighboring fields already alive with spring planting. Every afternoon at 5, the Walkers made this leisurely circuit, a ritual born of decades spent tending land, raising children, and welcoming grandchildren. For James and Mary, these daily walks preserved both health and a shared history. Conversation drifted from trivial neighborhood gossip, Mrs. DeWitt's new rescue dog, to deeper reflections on life's passing seasons. Mary paused to pluck a dandelion from the roadside. "We've done well here, Jim," she said, twisting the stem. "Built memories, raised a family, and still going strong." James nodded, turning to face the grove. "We have. And soon, it'll be time to hand these maples over to Michael and David. They'll carry on what we started." A distant rumble, engine and gears, signaled a delivery truck crossing the creek bridge. The children bounded away toward home as a truck driver waved through the open window. The Walkers raised their hands in friendly return. As they rejoined the paved road, golden light deepened into long shadows. James slipped his hand into Mary's. "Ready for home?" he asked gently. "Always," she replied, her smile warm as sunset. Together, they walked back down Maple Creek Road, their footsteps soft on dusty pavement, wrapped in the peaceful rhythm of Cedar Ridge, unaware that the calm of this small town, so precious to them, would soon give way to trials none could foresee. Late that Thursday afternoon, the sky over Cedar Ridge held a soft, golden hue. James and Mary had barely completed their customary loop around the farm when they reached the narrow country crossroads where Maple Creek Road intersected with Pine Hollow Lane. A faded stop sign leaned at a crooked angle, its paint chipped by years of sun and wind. Mary paused to straighten it, noting how it seemed to sag ever more with time. "Careful, Mary," James said gently, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "Let me handle that." She smiled, grateful, and watched as he steadied the sign. They talked quietly about dinner plans. Mary would prepare her famous cornbread and the new chick hatchlings in the coop. The only sounds were the rustle of maple leaves overhead and the distant hum of a tractor tilling the neighbor's field. Then came the thunderous roar of an engine far too close, too fast. James straightened as a bright red sport bike, its rider in full leathers and helmet, hurtled into view. The rider's posture was aggressive, shoulders hunched, head down, entirely focused on speed. "James!" Mary cried, tugging at his arm. But it was too late. With a screech of tires on gravel, the motorcycle skidded across the intersection. James and Mary stood frozen, hearts pounding. As time seemed to stretch, in the instant before impact, James pushed Mary backward, a father's last act of protection. Mary stumbled onto the roadside grass, tumbling but struggling to her knees. A sickening crack echoed as the sport bike collided with James's broad chest. He flew backward like a fallen log, landing with a heavy thud at the base of the signpost. The rider, already thrown, slid across the pavement into the shallow ditch, helmet bouncing as he skidded to a stop. Seconds later, Mary scrambled over, tears blurring her vision. She found James motionless. His cap rolled 10 feet away, his breathing shallow. She turned to the rider, who lay unmoving, the visor of his helmet cracked. Screams echoed from both ends of the country lane as neighbors rushed toward the scene. Mrs. DeWitt, hearing the commotion from her porch, was first to arrive, cell phone trembling. "I've called 911, she shouted, dropping to her knees beside Mary. Within minutes that felt like an eternity, the red and white ambulance slid to a halt across the intersection. Paramedics leapt out, pulling their stretcher and medical equipment. They moved with practiced urgency, checking vital signs, immobilizing James's head and neck, administering oxygen. Mary watched, clutching James's hand, her voice a fragile whisper. "It'll be okay," she murmured as much to herself as to him. "You're okay, Jim." A second team knelt alongside the motorcyclist, whose helmet came off to reveal a young man, barely 25, eyes closed, bleeding from a shallow gash on his temple. He winced, groaned. "Sir, can you hear me?" a paramedic asked. The rider blinked, disoriented. "Road slippery," he mumbled. The paramedic's face was grave. "We'll get you to the hospital. Hang in there." As paramedics loaded James onto one stretcher and the rider onto another, neighbors formed a loose circle, offering blankets and words of comfort to Mary. She was gently guided into a police cruiser to give her statement. How they'd been walking slowly, how she'd touched the sign, how the bike had appeared out of nowhere. Sheriff's Deputy Morales dusted for skid marks, shining his flashlight over the gravel. "Looks like speed," he said to a colleague. "Must have been doing at least 50 on a 25 zone." Mary watched from the back seat, tears falling unchecked. She felt hollow, disconnected from the gentle rhythms that had defined her life. James, his reassuring presence, his easy laugh, was lying in an ambulance heading for Cedar Ridge Community Hospital. Inside the emergency room, chaos reigned. Nurses and doctors swarmed over James, running x-rays, inserting 4 drips, checking his pulse. His eyes flickered open briefly, and he pressed a trembling finger to his chest, as though to confirm breath still rose and fell. Mary arrived moments later, flanked by Deputy Morales. She found Michael and David already at James's bedside, Michael's kind brown eyes dulled with shock, David pacing with clenched fists. "Mom," Michael said, stepping forward. He took Mary's hand and guided her to the chair beside James. David put an arm around Michael, swallowed hard. This is going to be okay," David whispered, though his voice cracked. A doctor in green scrubs approached, name badge reading Dr. Patel. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "James has multiple fractures, pelvis, ribs, and we're concerned about internal bleeding. He's going into surgery immediately. Mary, we'll need you to be strong." Mary nodded numbly. "My husband, please save him." They wheeled James away. Mary watched until the double doors swung shut, then sank to her knees, head bowed. Michael knelt beside her, pressing her hand. David stood just behind, shoulders stooped. Somewhere in the whirlwind of alarms, footsteps, hushed conversations, Mary found herself wishing for the simple calm of their farm, the maple shadows, the children's laughter, the easy companionship of her husband. But those memories now felt distant, as though tainted by the sharp ring of tragedy. Deputy Morales offered his phone. "Your sons know, Mrs. Walker. Your other family's on line 1. Mary rose to her feet, voice catching. "Thank you." She dialed home, knowing that their daughter-in-law, Gail, would break the news to the grandchildren. Mary's hand trembled as she asked for a prayer, as she whispered a plea that the man she had loved for 50 years would walk out of this hospital alive. And so Cedar Ridge's golden afternoon shattered into flashing lights and medical urgency, its small-town calm replaced by the unsteady hope that love and skillful hands could mend a life so abruptly torn apart. 7 days passed in a blur of sterile corridors and beeping monitors. Mary Walker hovered in a haze of morphine, her eyelids fluttering with each breath but never fully opening. James remained unconscious in intensive care, his body a tangle of tubes and wires, his chest rising and falling beneath a ventilator. Michael and David took turns at Mary's bedside, clutching her hand through sleepless nights. Each morning, Dr. Patel entered with measured steps and somber eyes. "No change today," she would say, placing a gentle hand on each brother's shoulder. "Her brain swelling is stable but still significant. We'll wait another 24 hours. Meanwhile, Michael oversaw arrangements for their parents' farm, fielding calls from worried neighbors and relaying updates. His world had narrowed to 2 hospital rooms, one for Mary, one for James, and a frantic hope that medicine might restore the life they once knew. On the 8th morning, Mary's monitor flatlined for a moment. Nurses rushed in, checking vitals. A crackle of static on the speaker. Then steady beeping again. Mary's thin fingers twitched. When Michael burst into room 312, he found Mary's dark eyes focused on him. "Mom," he breathed. She nodded, her lips forming silent words. He dropped to one knee, pressing an ear to her mouth. "What is it, Mom? Tell me." Mary's voice was raspy, almost a whisper. "Take him home." Michael glanced toward the hallway. He knew she meant James. "They'll keep Dad in ICU a little longer," he said. "He's not stable." Mary shook her head, eyes fiery. "He said, under our maple." Tears pooled in Michael's eyes. "He wants to go home?" Mary reached out, brushing his cheek. Her voice steadied with fierce determination. "No more hospital." Michael swallowed. I'll tell the doctors." Later that day, Dr. Patel stood in the hallway outside the ICU, arms folded. Michael and David exchanged wary looks. "Mom wants him home," Michael said softly. "Dr. Patel's gaze softened. "His injuries are critical. Transporting him is risky." She paused. "But if that's his wish, and if your mother is coherent, we can prepare a palliative transfer. He won't be on a ventilator." David's chest tightened. He wants to breathe fresh air, see the maples. Inside Mary's room, the brothers helped her sit up. Though pale and frail, her eyes sparkled with conviction. "Thank you," she whispered. She managed a weak smile. "We promised each other, always be together." Nurses and aides moved swiftly through the hospital's back corridors. A specially equipped ambulance arrived, silent and white, its stretcher and oxygen ready. The brothers removed James's ventilator tube. His breathing was slow, but steady. He lay bare-chested, chest rising in shallow waves. A nurse placed a small pillow under his head. Another gently shaved his beard to prevent irritation. Mary was wheeled into the ambulance alongside him, his hand weakly clutching hers. Michael and David flanked the stretcher, guiding them into the vehicle. The doors closed, and the ambulance lights turned off. In the hush, the family shared a single prayer, then began the careful journey back to Maple Creek Road. Dusk settled over Cedar Ridge as the ambulance rolled onto the farm drive. Fireflies danced above the fields, and a chorus of cicadas rose from the grass. Neighbors had gathered at a respectful distance, their lanterns and flashlights forming a soft glow along the driveway. Mrs. DeWitt, clutching a blanket, met the ambulance crew, directing them to the farmhouse porch. Once inside, the living room had been cleared of furniture. A small oxygen tank sat next to the couch, where Mary was settled in soft pillows. James was laid on a makeshift bed prepared under the largest silver maple, its branches swaying overhead. A wind chime hung from a low limb, tinkling in the summer breeze. Mary was helped outside, her frail form leaning on Michael's arm. James's eyes flickered open. He blinked, taking in the maples, the open sky. He tried to speak, but his voice caught. Mary dropped Michael's hand and moved to stand beside James, her trembling hand resting on his. He managed a soft sigh of relief. "Home," he rasped. Mary brushed a tear from her own cheek. "We made it," she whispered. For 2 hours, they sat together under the maples as twilight deepened. Fireflies wove between branches and field grass. Crickets serenaded the night. Michael and David stood respectfully apart, fixing iced tea and blankets near a lantern. Neighbors watched silently, some wiping tears. Mary leaned against James, drawing strength from his warmth. He squeezed her hand. She closed her eyes, the effort of travel making her tired. He followed her lead, reaching to tuck a folded blanket around her shoulders. As the moon rose, Mary's breathing slowed. James's eyelids fluttered. Their heads met in a gentle, final farewell, two souls who'd walked this road together for more than 5 decades. When Mary exhaled her last breath, the chime above them tinkled once. James opened his eyes, sensing her absence. He turned his gaze upward to the silver maple canopy, its limbs catching moonlight like memories. He reached for Mary's hand, but found only empty pillow. He closed his eyes, a single tear tracing a line down his cheek. The maple leaves stirred in the night breeze, and somewhere a lone cricket's song carried on. In that hush beneath the trees, the walkers' final wish was granted. They were home, together one last time, cradled by the farm they'd loved. The morning after their parents' final moments beneath the silver maple, Cedar Ridge awoke to a hush that felt heavier than any storm. Word of James and Mary Walker's peaceful passing had spread like lantern light in the dark. Neighbors whispered condolences, and the county sheriff's office offered any assistance the family might need. But within the Walker household, a different tension crackled. The reading of the will. Neil Walker, the family attorney, a kindly man in his 60s with gentle eyes behind thin spectacles, gathered Michael and David in the living room. The hardwood floors gleamed under morning sunbeams, and photographs of James and Mary's life together lined the mantel. Michael, tall and earnest with deep-set brown eyes, sat upright on the edge of the sofa. David, stockier with a trimmed salt and pepper beard, lounged in an armchair, arms folded. "Gentlemen," Neil began, placing a sealed envelope on the coffee table, "I wish I had gentler news to share. Your parents left a very clear set of instructions." David exchanged a glance with Michael. "They left everything half and half?" he asked. "In broad strokes, yes," Neil said, opening the envelope and unfolding the letter. "Each of you inherits 50% of the Walker family farm, 30 acres of land, including the silver maple grove, the orchard, the fish pond, and all equipment associated with the operation." David nodded. "Makes sense." His tone, though, was too casual, like a gambler who had already spent his winnings. "However," Neil continued, raising a finger, "there is a stipulation about how the land is to be divided. This is directly from Mary's handwriting." He read aloud, "To my beloved sons Michael and David. The silver maple grove shall be Michael's domain, with all tapping equipment and syrup production responsibilities. The fish pond and adjacent woodlet shall be David's domain, including fish hatchery and timber rights. Should either brother wish to alter these divisions, it must be approved in writing by both parties. All proceeds from the farm operations are to be shared equally, with detailed accounting provided quarterly. In the event of a dispute, a neutral mediator shall be appointed by the Cedar Ridge Agricultural Board. Michael's jaw clenched. He had envisioned maintaining the grove, his passion, and was happy to let David manage the pond. "That's exactly what we discussed," he said softly. David's eyes narrowed. "You know, when Mother first handed Dad that paper, he jokingly told me he wanted the pond because it's quieter. Maybe she just copied that." Neil raised an eyebrow. "We must take the will as it stands. Your mother was clear." David leaned forward. "I want to talk about changing Clause 3. I'd prefer a horizontal split. The top half of the property, where the pond sits, goes to Michael's family legacy, so he gets the grove and half the pond. The bottom half, with mixed woods and pasture, goes to me." Michael's face reddened. "You want to slice through the heart of the silver maples? You'd leave me with nothing but a few taps on half a grove and a quarter-acre pond."
"No,"
David snapped, throwing up his hands. "It's fairer. You can have half a grove and half the pond. I get half the grove and you get half the pond? That's exactly half." Neil cleared his throat. "The will specifies by domain. Michael gets the grove. David gets the pond. Splitting each domain would violate your parents' intent." David let out a frustrated sigh. Intent, schmintent. They never planted that many trees. They built the pond later. His voice rose. "Dad spent 20 years tapping those trees, and now you want it all to be yours? You reap what I sow here and call it equal?" Michael slammed his fist on the sofa arm. "That's not true. I replanted that section after the ice storm. I invested in organic upgrades. It's my blood, sweat, and tears making that grove profitable. You just fed fish and cut down dead logs." David shot to his feet. "Fish are fragile. I've managed the hatchery and built new docks. Without the pond, you'd have no tourism tours or fishing catfish dinners. Your syrup farm wouldn't stand on its own." Michael also rose. "And without my grove, where would your pond visitors eat? My taproom brings in 30% of our revenue." Silence fell as the weight of their words settled. Neil held up a hand. "Gents, please. Emotions are high, but we must respect your parents' final wishes." David paced. "So what? We can't negotiate?" "Dad wanted compromise, he said so." Michael's eyes softened.
"He did.
But compromise meant each of us has distinct roles. He knew we'd work together. He and Mom crafted the will to reflect that." Neil nodded. "Your mother lived through one divorce, your father's sister. She insisted on clear divisions to prevent exactly this kind of conflict." The brothers exchanged haunted glances, the memory of heated arguments over childhood treasures momentarily flashing between them. Just then, Kevin, Michael's son, entered quietly, only 18. With his mother Gail's bright green eyes and Michael's sturdy build, Kevin looked like a younger reflection of his father. "Dad, Uncle David," he asked, "why are you shouting?" Michael stepped forward. "Kevin, come here." He ushered his son between them. "Kevin has been through every summer tap with me. He knows this grove better than anyone." David rolled his eyes. "What about my kid? He's only 12, but he's planned my pond tours with me." Neil intervened gently. "This is no competition of parenthood, boys." He crouched, placing hands on Kevin's shoulders. "Kevin, your grandparents wanted you and your cousins, David's kids, to grow up pulling taps, counting fish, and learning responsibility. That's why they divided it this way." Kevin looked from his dad to his uncle. "So Grandpa and Grandma wanted Michael to run the syrup and David to run the pond. They said it keeps things fair." Michael's voice cracked. "Exactly, son." David swallowed. His arms dropped.
"I'm sorry, Kev."
"I lost track of what matters." Kevin stepped to David and offered a tentative hug. "I know you love the pond. Uncle Mike loves the Grove. Grandpa and Grandma wanted us all happy. Michael hugged Kevin, then extended an arm around David's shoulders. Let's settle this. We follow Mom's will, just like Dad and Mom planned. We work together, share profits equally. David nodded, eyes glistening. Okay, I overreacted. I'll stick with the pond. Neil exhaled with relief. Then we have agreement. I'll draft the mutual consent form under Clause 3, no changes, just formal acknowledgement. The tension that had shaped the morning dissolved as the brothers, two men who'd shared a lifetime of sibling rivalry, embraced their shared history beneath the family roof. Outside, the sun climbed higher, glinting through the silver maple leaves, a silent blessing upon Cedar Ridge's newly mended walkers. Michael stepped off the gravel driveway onto soft, dew-damp grass and inhaled deeply, savoring the sharp tang of spring in the air. The first rays of dawn painted the silver maples in pale gold, and through the trunks he could see rows of freshly drilled spiles, each one ready to yield the season's sap. It was his first full season running Walker's silver maple syrup on the 30-acre parcel he now owned outright, and though excitement hummed through him like a live wire, he felt a solemn responsibility to honor his parents' memory on this land they had nurtured for decades. Kevin, still in his sleep clothes, padded up beside him, clutching a clipboard of detailed tapping records. Michael tousled his son's dark hair and nodded. Everything looked good, he asked softly. The boy's eyes were bright, full of pride. All spiles are secure, Kevin confirmed, tapping his pen 8 times against the board. Bucket 9 had a small leak. Leo fixed it last night. Michael swallowed a lump of emotion at the mention of Leo, his part-time helper who had taken to the work like a duck to water. They climbed into the box of Michael's old pickup truck, solid, dependable, just like his father's pride in him, and drove along the narrow lane between maples whose trunks were just beginning to swell with sap. The first bucket they passed held a pale trickle, but Michael knew even that small promise would turn to liquid gold, the very essence of his family, condensed and clear. He parked near the barn, where 24 gleaming stainless steel buckets waited to be cleaned and sanitized. Carla arrived moments later, already slipping on gloves and humming a cheerful tune. She was the first hire Michael had made, an agriculture student with a knack for social media and a genuine love of the land. Together they worked in a quiet rhythm. Carla scrubbed each bucket, her sponge moving in smooth circles around the rims. Leo, who arrived soon after with a thermos of strong coffee, tested each valve for leaks. Kevin recorded tree numbers and tap depths. Michael moved between them, checking record sheets, double-checking tag numbers, and offering gentle corrections. He felt the familiar tug of nostalgia mixed with purpose. His father teaching him to drill clean holes, his mother showing him how to judge sap quality by its faint sweetness. By mid-morning, the grove was fully tapped and the buckets hung in place like small lanterns in the trees. Michael inspected the tubing lines leading to the collection tanks, nodding with satisfaction when he spotted no kinks or drips. Let's head to the sugar house, he said, climbing into his truck. Behind him, the sound of clinking buckets and birdsong drifted across the field. The sugar house, built last summer with a small business loan, gleamed under the high ceiling. Steam vents ran along one wall, and at its heart stood a brand-new stainless steel evaporator array, its smooth surfaces reflecting the dancing light from overhead bulbs. Michael ran his hand lightly along the side of the first pan, recalling the sleepless nights he'd spent researching manufacturers, comparing features, and negotiating price. It was the most significant investment he'd ever made. Carla and Leo helped empty the gravity-fed tanks into the first pan, while Kevin monitored the built-in thermometer. Michael lit the wood fire beneath the steam jacket, arranging birch logs for maximum heat without smoke. Gentle and steady, he told Leo. Too hot and we'll scorch the sap. Too low and the season's window will close before we finish.
For 2 hours.
They held a careful balance. The pan hissed and steamed, the pale sap slowly transforming into amber perfection. Michael skimmed off foam with a fine mesh ladle, tossing it aside and wiping sweat from his brow. He lifted the hydrometer, reading its scale to ensure the syrup reached precisely 219 degrees Fahrenheit by density. Carla filled tasting spoons and passed them to him and Leo. Michael sampled a drop, letting the complex flavors of vanilla and caramel wash over his tongue. "That's it," he said, smiling broadly. "Grade A amber. Perfect color, perfect mouth feel." They filled the first bottles that afternoon, label after label affixed with steady hands. Elegant maple leaf logos beneath cursive, Walker's Silver Maple Syrup, accented in deep forest green and gold. "From our grove to your table," the tagline read, promising authenticity and homegrown quality. As dusk settled, Michael lined the bottles on wooden pallets, each one catching the soft glow of workshop lights like a jewel. 2 days later, he and Kevin set up their tent at the Charlottesville Farmers Market. An early spring chill lingered, and they wore jackets embroidered with the Walker logo. Michael arranged bright chalkboard signs. "Walker's 2025 tapping season," and "Fresh maple syrup, limited release." Kevin hung twinkling fairy lights along the tent frame, hoping the gentle glow would draw curious shoppers. Next to them, a beekeeper displayed honeycomb samples, while a baker sold crusty loaves of sourdough. At 9 o'clock, the gate opened and marketgoers began to trickle in. Michael offered paper cups of syrup-thinned hot water, a nod to traditional sap tasting, and stood back as a local food blogger filmed Kevin explaining the process. A woman in a wool scarf and ankle boots took a sip, closing her eyes. "So smooth, there's no bitter finish," she murmured, setting down her coffee and reaching for a bottle. "I'll take 2. Word spread. The line at the Walker tent migrated around neighboring stalls. A chef from the farmhouse bistro nearby approached, extended his hand, and introduced himself. "Your grade B is exactly what I need for our pancake special next month. Let's talk wholesale." Michael's pulse raced. He jotted details in his notebook, already planning to expand production. By afternoon, they'd sold out 20 cases. Michael posted a celebratory photo on Instagram, an array of syrup bottles under the golden afternoon sun. Comments streamed in. "Best syrup I've ever tasted. Can't wait for June's harvest. Reserving my case for next season." Michael scrolled in awe, heart warmed by each message. Back at the farm that evening, exhausted but exhilarated, Michael sat alone beneath the oldest maple. He closed his eyes, letting the soft hum of crickets and the distant croak of frogs settle him. Pulling out his phone, he texted Carla, "We did it. Thank you. Couldn't have without you." Within seconds, her reply blinked on screen. Team Walker for life. In the weeks that followed, Michael navigated unexpected challenges: a sudden late freeze that halted sap flow, a minor fire under the evaporator pan that Carla doused skillfully, and supply shortages of bottling lids. But each obstacle taught him to refine his process. He invested in frost monitors to predict flow better, added backup fire extinguishers, and negotiated a bulk lid order with a glass supplier in Richmond. Every solution made Walker's operation more resilient. At home, Kevin charted sales growth in neat spreadsheets. Carla began crafting short videos to show visitors how tapping worked, and Leo handled local delivery logistics. Michael orchestrated it all with the calm confidence of a man rooted firmly in both tradition and innovation. By the end of spring, Walker's Silver Maple Syrup had secured contracts with 3 local eateries, a monthly feature on the regional public radio food show, and over 300 direct-to-customer pre-orders for next season. Michael had repaid half of his startup loan and started budgeting for a second evaporator and a dedicated bottling shed. Under the silver maples his parents once strolled, Michael felt their presence in every budding leaf and every warm drop he poured into jars. His father's hands, his mother's determined smile, they lived on in each bottle, carrying forward a legacy reborn. And as long as the maple stood, he knew Walker's Silver Maple Syrup would flourish for generations to come. David Walker woke before dawn, the eastern sky shifting from inky black to deep indigo. He crept out of the old family farmhouse, now quiet except for him and Paula, and made his way to the shared boundary where Michael's maple grove began. Dew clung to the grass, and each breath formed a mist in the crisp air. Paula's words from the night before echoed in his mind. If he thinks he can shut you out, make him feel some pain. They'd argued for weeks. Michael's syrup venture thrived. David's portion, centered on the fish pond, was languishing. Fueled by Paula's insistence that Michael hogged profits, David's bruised pride morphed into something darker. Last night, at their kitchen table, Paula slid 2 unmarked jugs across the peeling wood surface. "Herbicide," she said softly, eyes gleaming. "A little in his pond, and that hatchery is finished." David stared at the plain jugs. Now, crouched beside the pond's still waters, he shook one. The label had been scrubbed away. Sinister silence pressed in as he poured a slug of clear liquid along the shoreline. Each drop hissed on contact. Brown blades of invasive weeds curled and died almost instantly. David swallowed hard. Nearby, Paula stayed hidden in the treeline, her phone's camera trained on him. "Perfect," she whispered, anticipation in her smile. "He'll come running." Next, they moved to the maple grove. Under cover of early morning shadows, David unscrewed a can of potent defoliant. He knelt at the base of a row of maples newly tapped with stainless steel spiles. Though his heart pounded, he followed Paula's instructions. Spray the lowest branches, ensuring any runoff would drip onto the bark and tubing. Golden sap dripped from the taps that afternoon, but Michael noticed odd streaks of yellow on the ground below. He frowned as he tested the sap's clarity. A faint chemical tang irritated his nose. His stomach clenched. "That can't be right," he muttered. By evening, Michael drove his tractor to inspect the hatchery. The pond teemed with fingerling bass just days from juvenile size. Now dozens floated dead at the surface, bellies swollen. Michael leapt out, heart racing. He waded in, scooping fish into a bucket. Each limp body confirmed his worst fears. That night, Michael sat in the farmhouse kitchen, fluorescent lights flickering overhead. Carla, his operations manager, pressed a paper cup of filtered sap into his hand. He inhaled. Underneath the expected sweetness lay a harsh, sour note. He spat it out, eyes blazing. "Someone poisoned my sap and my fish." Sheriff Morales arrived at dawn. Michael led him through the grove first, patches of brown leaves, sap tubes stained with an oily sheen. At the pond, Morales knelt to examine the shoreline. "Herbicide," he said. "I'll collect samples and run tests, but without eyewitnesses. Proving who did this will be difficult." Michael's jaw tightened. "I suspect my brother," he said quietly. "He's the only one with access." Morales nodded. "I'll keep you updated." But Michael saw the deputy's hesitation, small-town loyalties, lack of hard evidence. Over the next week, Michael's world unraveled. Orders for Walker's Silver maple syrup were canceled. Chefs pulled menus featuring his grade B for fear of contamination. Carla and Leo worked around the clock to find any unaffected supply, extended filtration, small batch boil-downs, but the smell of chemicals lurked in every vat. Michael discovered other signs of tampering. Sap collection records swapped, tapping locations misnumbered. Loan documents for his new evaporator missing from his drawer. Furious, he confronted David at the farmhouse. David answered the door, startled. "Did you do this?" Michael demanded, holding out a jug-marked constrictor and printed photos from Paula's phone, images of David spraying the grove. David recoiled. "Paula's behind this," Michael pressed. "You let her. She's sabotaged everything." Paula stepped from the shadows, phone in hand. "He needed a wake-up call," she snarled. "He's taken half the farm and all the glory for himself. I just helped him balance the score." Michael's hands shook. "You poisoned my father's land. Our family legacy for what?" Paula's eyes glittered. "Because it's what you deserved." David sank onto the porch steps, head in hands. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I got carried away." Michael turned away, pain lancing through him. The grove's promising buds drooped. The pond lay sterile. His parents' dreams lay in ruins. "Sorry doesn't fix this," he said. "I'll have to call the sheriff." David glanced up. No, Michael, you can't. He won't press charges without proof. His voice broke. We'll lose it all if this goes public. Michael stared at his brother, torn between justice and survival. Neighbors already whispered. Speculation spreading like wildfire. If charges dragged on, local customers would abandon him. Paula's sabotage threatened to destroy everything he'd built. Late that night, Michael returned alone to the grove. Moonlight shimmered on damaged leaves. He knelt at the base of an ancient maple that his grandfather had planted, a cornerstone of their legacy. He placed his palm against its scarred bark, closed his eyes, and whispered, "I vowed to rebuild us. I promised you'd thrive again." He rose with resolve. The next morning, he called a meeting with Paula and David, Sheriff Morales, and community mediators. He presented chemical test results capturing Paula at the grove and pond, along with photos of her and David handling the herbicide. Under pressure, Paula confessed. David, tears streaming, vowed to help Michael restore the land. The sheriff, empowered by Paula's admission, filed formal charges. Paula faced fines and community service. David received probation and mandatory counseling. But Michael, exhausted by legal battles, accepted a mediated settlement. David would relinquish his woodlet and pond domain, selling his share back to Michael at a discounted rate. Michael agreed to compensate David fairly and offered him an hourly wage under strict oversight, preserving their family bond as best he could. Weeks later, Michael and a small crew began restoration. They flushed the pond with fresh water, reintroduced fingerlings from a trusted hatchery, and installed natural barriers to prevent future contamination. In the grove, they pruned dead leaves and applied natural soil treatments to encourage new growth. Carla documented the efforts on social media, transparency to regain customer trust. Each step reaffirmed Michael's belief in resilience. When the first clean sap dripped into sanitized buckets, he collected a sample and tasted it, a pure, sweet pledge of renewal. He poured a small measure at the base of the grand maple, a silent offering to the land and his parents' memory. Under the silver maples at Cedar Ridge, the land breathed again. Though scarred by betrayal, it hummed with promise, the promise that, with care and integrity, even the deepest wounds could heal. The morning sun painted the rolling hills of the Shenandoah Valley in soft gold as Michael Walker steered his truck off Route 340 and down a narrow lane framed by budding maples and rhododendron thickets. He felt a quiet thrill mixed with apprehension. This 40-acre parcel, once the McAllister family's weekend escape, now held the promise of redemption. Cedar Hollow Farm's pond glimmered in the distance, its surface undisturbed, and a solitary red barn stood sentinel on a low rise. He inhaled deeply, the crisp mountain air filling his lungs and washing away the last echoes of betrayal that lingered in Cedar Ridge. Carla and Leo, arriving moments later in Michael's white van, hopped out with toolboxes in hand and eager faces. Kevin, delaying high school classes to help set up, bounded out of the passenger seat, his clipboard already tracking tasks. Together they surveyed the land, the young maples waiting for taps, the pond bank in need of cleanup, and the barn's cavernous interior begging for renovation. Michael felt a pang of nostalgia for the grove at home, but he forced his gaze forward. This was a fresh start. Inside the barn, dust motes danced in shafts of light. Michael ran his hand across rough-sawn beams. Memories of his parents returned, Mary's gentle call to dinner, James teaching him how to steady the drill. He voiced the thought aloud. We'll build something new here, but we'll honor them every step. Carla unpacked tubing coils, Leo stacked sanitizing buckets, and Kevin sketched a layout on a scrap of barnwood. It all felt right. Over the next 2 weeks, they worked from dawn to dusk. The old stalls were cleared of decades of hay, rotted boards replaced, the floor leveled and sealed with concrete. Michael oversaw the installation of a steam-jacketed evaporator gifted by the McAllisters, who urged him to take all the time he needed. Carla wired in lights, mounted shelves for equipment, and rigged a small loft office so they could process orders on site. Leo ran electrical lines, patched the roof, and sealed gaps to keep out mice. Each evening, Michael surveyed their progress, pride blooming alongside exhaustion. One night, under stringed lanterns, they toasted cider in the loft. "To new beginnings," Michael said, and they all agreed. When the maples first dripped sap, Michael led the tapping operation himself. He drilled pilot holes 3 feet up the trunks, tapped in stainless steel spiles, and hung food-grade buckets, each tagged and logged for tracking. Carla sanitized every spile and recorded flow data. Leo tested sap clarity. Kevin noted each tree's GPS marker. By midday, the grove emitted a soft clinking chorus as sap collected. They used gravity to feed sap into the evaporator in the newly christened Shenandoah Sugar House. Michael fed birch logs into the firebox, maintaining steady heat beneath the pans. Steam drove condensation up the jacket and back down, maximizing efficiency. The team skimmed foam, took hydrometer readings, and measured density to hit 219 degrees Fahrenheit precisely. Each test jar, from pale yellow to rich amber, brimmed with the valley's unique terroir, notes of wildflower honey and a hint of mountain pine. Carla filled sample bottles and delivered them to the Shenandoah Harvest Cafe the next morning. The cafe's owner, Lydia, draped in a vibrant scarf, sniffed the syrup and beamed. "This is incredible," she declared, adding it to the weekend special. A local chef from the Frontier Farmstead followed days later, requesting a wholesale arrangement. Michael's heart soared. These were the breakthroughs he dreamed of, now rooted in Shenandoah soil. At the weekend farmers market in Luray, their booth quickly became a destination. Carla arranged bottles in rows, Valley Reserve by walkers, labels gleaming under the tent. Hand-lettered signs proclaimed limited early release, and Maple and Mountain, hand in hand. Kevin offered tastings in small cups, guiding customers through the grading system. Grade A Amber sold out first, then came Grade B Reserve, prized for its robust caramel notes. By noon, they'd sold more than half their stock. Neighbors from both farms came to cheer them on, exchanging recipes and warm congratulations. But building anew carried challenges. A late-season frost stalled sap flow one week, prompting Michael to install frost monitors and deploy heat lamps around vulnerable taps. A sudden rainstorm flooded the barn floor. Leo rigged sandbags and improved drainage. A curious raccoon dismantled part of their tubing at night. Carla's quick repair and added mesh guards prevented further sabotage. Each obstacle became a lesson, making their operation stronger and more resilient. As syrup sales stabilized, Michael turned to revitalizing the pond hatchery. He installed an aeration fountain and added shallow riffles to encourage spawning. He sourced fingerling trout from a trusted hatchery in Charlottesville, carefully acclimating them to the spring-fed water. Each morning, he waded into the pond, testing pH and oxygen, while Kevin counted fry and logged growth rates. The first batch of fingerlings reached catch size within 2 months, ready for stocking at a local youth fishing pond, a community partnership Michael was proud to foster. Behind the scenes, Michael updated his website and social media channels with photos and video clips. Dawn mist drifting over the pond, maple buckets dripping in sunlight, Carla's hands stirring bubbling sap. Leo's steady adjustments to the evaporator. #Shenandoah season drew hundreds of followers in days, and pre-orders rolled in from across Virginia. Michael logged each order with meticulous care, promising on-time delivery and personal touches, gift notes, recipe cards, even small jars labeled "From our grove to your table." One afternoon, a pickup arrived with a box of wildflower honey from Mrs. Emerson's apiary up the road. Michael met her with a handshake. "I want to collaborate on a maple honey blend," he explained. She agreed, intrigued by the idea. Together they created Maple Blossom Blend, a seasonal bestseller at the Shenandoah General Store. Their partnership symbolized the spirit of community that had embraced him from the start. Late one evening, Michael walked through the orchard under a full moon. The maple silhouettes shimmered against the sky. He closed his eyes and listened. The whisper of leaves, the distant call of an owl, the steady pulse of the valley's heartbeat. Here, he had planted a new chapter, one of hard work, integrity, and shared purpose. Betrayal and loss no longer defined his story. Instead, renewal and collaboration shaped each sunrise. In a year's time, Michael would look back on this season as the one that saved him. Shenandoah's fresh grounds had offered not only a farm but a community ready to lift him up, a landscape eager to yield its gifts,
and a team bound by trust.
Under these mountains he had found his footing again. He tapped another tree, then another, each drip of sap a reminder that life flows forward, carrying hope on its gentle current. And as long as those silver leaves trembled in the breeze, Michael Walker would honor his parents' legacy by forging his own, one bottle, one harvest, one sunrise at a time. Spring's bright promise faded for David Walker and Paula as word of their sabotage rippled through Cedar Ridge. With Paula's confession under oath and an official sheriff's report in hand, the local agricultural board revoked David's license to operate the fish hatchery. Neighbors who once greeted him with small talk now crossed the road to avoid him. Michael had insisted on a mediated settlement, David relinquishing his pond rights and selling his acreage back at a steep discount. But beyond that, David's reputation lay in ruins. Paula, facing felony charges for chemical trespass and fraud, found her once lofty social standing evaporating faster than sap in summer heat. The local cafe, where she volunteered for charity events, quietly withdrew her name from its board. Her book club, formerly a sisterhood of garden parties, disbanded around dinner tables, never including her invitation. When she walked into the general store to buy bread, the clerk caught her eye for a moment, then turned away. Desperate to reclaim control, Paula doubled down on the one sphere she still nominally controlled, David's finances. She convinced him to tap into the last reserves of their life savings, roughly $20,000, to cover legal fees, even as bank statements showed mounting penalties and an emptying account. "This is how we rebuild," she told him firmly, brushing back her hair with an air of entitlement. "We'll pay the fines, do the community service, and then Michael will see we're serious." But rebuilding required resources they no longer had. Michael's generosity, paying David an hourly wage to help with syrup production, came with strict oversight. David arrived early and left late, hauling wood, maintaining tubing, and cleaning barrels. Still, each paycheck barely covered the fines and mounting interest. Paula grew frantic, scanning news reports for any financial lifeline. One evening, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Urgent. You need to complete ID verification or funds will be frozen." Without hesitation, she replied, "Okay," and clicked the link sent. Within minutes, malware infiltrated her phone. Digital thieves emptied her and David's joint bank accounts. Over $40,000 vanished in a flash. Paula screamed into the receiver when she called the bank. "I didn't authorize this." But customer service agents could only offer sympathetic apologies. "We'll investigate." The promise of cold case resolutions felt hollow. David burst into Paula's living room that night to find her clutching her phone, tears streaming. "They took everything," she sobbed. "Our house, our nest egg gone." David sank onto the sofa, stunned. The last of their savings gone on legal fees, now stolen by faceless criminals. "Why did you click it?" he asked hoarsely, horror dawning. Paula covered her face. "I didn't think." Her failures had multiplied. Sabotage, legal ruin, financial collapse. As summer ripened, the strain bore down on them. They sold off David's old pickup for a fraction of its worth, then Paula's wedding china set. Each sale whispered defeat. Surveys offered them only rock-bottom prices. Eventually, they listed the farmhouse on Cedar Creek Road, the very place where their parents had raised them. Offers came slowly, and the market priced them as desperate sellers. A local developer snapped it up for barely half its appraised value. Within weeks, keys exchanged hands, and David and Paula received a check for under $60,000. They bid a muted farewell to the farmhouse, loading their meager belongings onto a rented U-Haul. Michael watched from the barn as they pulled away, shrink-wrapped furniture reflecting the late afternoon glare. David's eyes met Michael's through the rear window. A mixture of regret, shame, and a haunting question lingered there. But the truck rolled on, and soon they were gone. With no home, they drifted first to a cheap motel in town, then to a friend's spare room. The motel's peeling wallpaper and the friend's cramped couch reminded them daily of their fall from grace. David took odd jobs, painting barns and hauling hay, but the stigma of his conviction followed him like a shadow. Paula applied for waitressing gigs, but was turned away when background checks revealed her felony. Even the resume pad they had both once proudly filled now read like a criminal record. Winter approached with a gray chill that matched their spirits. Snow dusted the Shenandoah ridges, but they belonged nowhere. One frigid evening, David found Paula sobbing in the corner, clutching an eviction notice headlined, "Vacate premises in 30 days." Without a word, he wrapped his arms around her. Their shared failures etched lines they couldn't wash away. Meanwhile, Michael's operation in Shenandoah thrived. He had expanded his Valley Reserve line and paid off the McAllisters' lease early, as thanks. In Cedar Ridge, Walker's silver maple syrup regained prominence as Michael reopened his original grove, introducing community tours and educational workshops. Neighbors mentioned David and Paula occasionally, saw them head west, or heard they moved to the city. Though some regretted their misdeeds, most simply moved on. Back at the motel, David and Paula finally had little left but each other. One night, as they watched static on a motel television, David turned to Paula. "What now?" he asked, voice hollow. Paula wiped her eyes. "I don't know," she whispered. We have to live with what we did." Spring brought new sap flows and restored hope to Michael. For David and Paula, it merely brought the deadline to vacate the motel. They found a dingy basement apartment in a rundown neighborhood, cold in winter, hot in summer, noisy always. There, beneath plaster cracked with old neglect, they began a long reckoning. One morning, David rose before dawn and scribbled in a notebook titled "Make Amends." He listed apologies to Michael. His community service hours completed, the modest savings left from odd jobs. Paula joined him, writing letters of regret to neighbors and friends. They volunteered at a women's shelter under assumed names, quiet at first, then braver, sharing a version of their story as cautionary tale. And though few recognized them there, each act of service was a step towards self-forgiveness. Word eventually reached Michael. He heard they were in Harrisonburg volunteering and rebuilding trust wherever they could. On a clear spring day, Michael drove south, stopping at the shelter. He entered the main hall where Paula distributed sandwiches and David collected donations. When they looked up, time stood still. Paula's eyes widened. David's jaw dropped. Michael extended a jar of his finest syrup, grade A amber. "I made this for you," he said evenly. No bitterness, no triumph, just an offering. Paula's hand shook as she accepted it. David nodded, voice thick. "Thank you." Whatever lay ahead, the Walker name had endured storms fiercer than betrayal and risen again, rooted in land, community, and the hard lessons of one family's downfall and tentative redemption. Kevin Walker couldn't shake the knot in his stomach as he watched his father, Michael, offer that jar of syrup to David and Paula at the shelter. Months of guilt and distance hadn't erased everything, but Kevin saw a spark of hope in David's eyes when he accepted the bottle. That evening, Kevin sat on the edge of his bedroom floor in his Cedar Hollow farmhouse bedroom, staring at the manila envelope he'd carried in his backpack, the sealed results from the DNA testing he'd arranged months earlier with help from his college genetics professor. The bitterness of old wounds and the bloom of potential forgiveness swirled in his mind as he lifted the envelope. He knew what was inside could heal the family completely or fracture it again. Late that night, Michael found Kevin wide awake at the kitchen table, lit by a single lamp. Kevin placed the envelope before him. "Dad, I need to show you something," he said softly. Michael, bleary-eyed and weary from the day's work, nodded. Together they opened it. A single sheet bore clear results, a 99.8% probability that Michael and James Walker shared direct paternal lineage, and just 27% linking David and James, confirming Michael as the biological son of his father and David as adopted decades earlier. Kevin ran a finger along the printed confidence intervals. I did this because I needed the truth, and to end the fighting, he explained. Mom wanted it even. You and Uncle David fought before you even knew the truth. Michael closed his eyes, tension easing. He reached across the table and rested a hand on Kevin's shoulder. I understand why you did this, he said, voice thick. But it doesn't change how I feel about David. Tears glistened in Kevin's eyes. I just wanted peace for all of us. Early the next morning, Michael sent a text to David. Can we meet at Cedar Hollow's main gate at noon? I need to share something important. Paula, now working part-time at the shelter and saving for her own recovery program, eyed David's phone. Your son's not tricking you, is he? She asked tentatively. David tapped the message. No, he said slowly. This is about our family. At noon, Michael waited outside the farm gate. When David and Paula arrived, their faces were lined with cautious hope. Kevin stood between them, arms folded nervously. Michael handed the printed report to David. These are the results of Kevin's DNA test, he said. Turns out, I'm your brother by blood, but you were adopted into the family long ago. Grandpa and Grandma never knew until now. David scanned the sheet, confusion melting into tears. So, all that fighting, it was never about fairness? His voice cracked. Michael shook his head.
No.
You were always my brother. I may have more shares on paper, but that doesn't change my love. Paula looked from Michael to David. Does this help? She whispered. David folded the results. It helps me see why we clashed, he said, taking a shaky breath. I hurt you. I hurt Kevin. I want to make it right. Michael placed a hand on his brother's arm. Then we rebuild together. No grudges, no settlements. Just family. Kevin exhaled, relief glowing in his face. In the weeks that followed, the Walkers restructured the farm once more, not by paperwork, but by shared purpose. Michael invited David to co-manage the Shenandoah parcel. They split morning shifts so each could mentor Kevin and David's children in tapping and hatchery work. Paula, grateful for her fresh start, enrolled in community college courses on organic farming, offering her skills to improve their methods. They held a family gathering beneath the silver maples at Cedar Ridge, inviting neighbors, friends, and the mediation volunteers who had guided them through the worst times. Under a white tent, Michael poured tins of Grandma Walker's famous cornbread, now passed down and perfected by Paula, who took pride in weaving family recipes back into communal tables. David manned the grill, flipping burgers and fish tacos made with fingerlings he'd helped restock. Kevin led a tour through the grove, his enthusiasm restoring laughter to old pathways. Children raced between barrels of sap and aquafish tanks, their carefree joy a testament to the healing that had taken root. When the sun dipped low, Michael stood by the barn doors, watching David repair a spile with steady hands. He caught his brother's eye and raised a bottle of syrup. To family, he toasted silently. David nodded, returning the gesture. Paula and Kevin joined them, forming a circle bathed in twilight. Later, as fireflies emerged among the maples, Michael found a quiet moment with Kevin. Thank you, he said, ruffling Kevin's hair. You gave us the truth, and a chance to be whole. Kevin smiled, tears shining in his eyes. Family's worth fighting for, he replied. Beneath those silver leaves, the Walkers closed a tumultuous chapter and opened one defined by trust, forgiveness, and unity. The land they shared, once rent by conflict, now bore witness to a stronger bond, rooted not just in blood, but in the choice to stand together, no matter what. The spring air in Cedar Ridge carried a gentle promise of rebirth as the Walker family gathered once more beneath the silver maples where their saga had begun. It had been a year since Michael first tapped those trees, weeks since Kevin's DNA revelation reunited them, and only days since David and Paula returned from Harrisonburg with renewed resolve. The farm felt different now, light in spirit, humming with shared purpose instead of bitter division. Michael stood at the edge of the clearing, the morning sun filtering through fresh green leaves, his gaze sweeping over the assembled faces, his mother-in-law Gail with her gentle smile, holding his youngest daughter, Carla, and Leo shoulder to shoulder, dirty from early tapping. Kevin proudly adjusting his clipboard for a final grove inspection, David and Paula side by side, radiating both humility and quiet strength. Even Mrs. McAllister had traveled up from Shenandoah to join them, bearing a basket of heirloom seeds as a gift. The old farmhouse seemed to breathe with the presence of so many, its porch sagging only slightly in a way that felt warmly familiar. No one said a word at first. The birds sang their morning song. A distant tractor rumbled. Bees hummed around dandelions carpeting the field. Michael inhaled, steadying himself. "Thank you," he said at last, voice carrying across the hush. "All of you for your trust, your hard work, and the chance to rebuild together." His words hung in the air, simple but sincere. He knew there was no magic spell for all their suffering, only the choice to forgive and to move forward. David stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the ground before meeting Michael's. He cleared his throat. "I want to say something." He paused, remembering how awkward forgiveness could feel.
Dad.
"Mom, I'm sorry for betraying your trust. Michael, I'm sorry for damaging everything you built. Kevin, I'm sorry for dragging you into this mess." His voice cracked. "And Paula, thank you for sticking by me, even when I didn't deserve it." He looked at Paula, who nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I want to prove I can be the brother and husband this family needs." Michael felt a lump in his throat. He placed a hand on David's shoulder. "I forgive you, David. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do next." He turned to Paula. "And you, too. Your help with community gardening and literacy programs has already shown us your heart." Paula's shoulders eased, and she exhaled a shaky breath. Kevin grinned, stepping forward to wrap his arms around each of them in turn. The moment crystallized into laughter and tears, as neighbors trumpeted congratulations and children ran to join the embrace. Under the silver maples, forgiveness blossomed like the spring leaves above. The weight of old grievances lifted as everyone felt the current of unity surging through their circle. Later, Michael guided the group to the barn, now freshly whitewashed and bustling with polished equipment. He invited them inside and gestured at new wooden shelves stocked with jars of syrup in graded rows, each label telling a story of renewal, second chance blend, family reserve, valley reconciliation. Carla beamed as she explained the naming process. "We wanted each bottle to carry a message of hope." Leo passed around sample spoons so everyone could taste the latest grade A amber, rich with tender sweetness. Even Mrs. McAllister's seed gift found its way into conversation. She and Paula had begun planting a heritage vegetable garden alongside the maple grove, honoring both the Walkers and the McAllisters' legacies. From bench seats around the evaporator, Michael reflected on how far they'd come. A year ago, the grove had been poisoned, the pond defiled. Lawsuits loomed, trust crumbled, and their farmhouse emptied. Now, thanks to honesty, courage, and communal effort, the pond teemed again with trout flicking in clear water, and the grove dripped pure sap. The transition from strife to solidarity had taught Michael that true wealth lay not in land alone but in the hearts and hands of people united by forgiveness. As midday approached, the group moved outside to share a picnic lunch on long tables laid end-to-end beneath the maples. Wooden boards brimming with cornbread from Paula, smoked trout from David, farm-fresh eggs from Carla's neighbor, and butter churned by Kevin's school project lined the tables. Michael poured syrup generously over fluffy pancakes he'd made just before dawn, the familiar aroma mingling with the earthy scent of new grass. Conversation flowed freely, stories of childhood antics, dreams for the orchard's future, plans for a fall harvest festival to celebrate their restored bond. At one end of the table sat Mr. Henderson, the town's mediator who had guided their first land dispute meeting. He lifted his coffee mug. "To the Walkers," he said. "Not because you're alone or perfect, but because you've shown how a family can heal when each member chooses forgiveness." Chairs clattered as everyone raised their mugs and glasses in agreement. When lunch wound down, Michael took his place at the head of the table. He cleared his throat. "Before we finish, I want to share what this journey has taught me." He paused to gather his thoughts. I learned that forgiveness isn't a weakness, it's a seed. You plant it when you admit you're wrong and give others the chance to grow better. David's mistakes could have buried our family, but instead, forgiveness let our roots go deeper. Change requires humility. Paula's willingness to step forward and help others lifted her own spirit, and now she helps this land thrive. He looked around the circle. Renewal isn't magic. It's work, day by day, sap by sap, apology by apology. Our grove produces new syrup each year because we prune dead wood, feed the soil, and protect the trees. Our family bond needed the same care. And moral, what's the lesson here? That life's sweetest harvest comes not from what you take, but from what you give. Honesty, compassion, and the capacity to forgive. There was a hush as his words sank in. Then Kevin piped up. Dad's right. We've lost so much time, trust, money. But I wouldn't trade any of it because it brought us back together. A chorus of nods and murmurs of agreement followed. As afternoon light softened into golden rays, neighbors began to tug at sleeves, helping clear dishes and fold tablecloths. Mrs. McAllister and Mrs. DeWitt exchanged gardening tips for the heritage plot. Carla and Leo cleaned sap buckets for tomorrow's run. Kevin led a small group of cousins to inspect maple sap lines, pointing out how a tiny leak could cost a gallon of sap if left unchecked. Michael lingered to watch, heart full. High in the maples, a breeze riffled new leaves. Beneath them, the walkers closed their circle in a final embrace, a ring of mutual respect sealed by shared toil and unspoken vows. The moral of their story had been etched in every parried insult and every healed relationship, that forgiveness and renewal are not endpoints, but living processes requiring daily attention. The farm thrived because they nurtured both land and love. And in Cedar Ridge's quiet valley, under trees that had witnessed both sorrow and celebration, the Walker family found a future rooted in hope and bound by a promise to keep forgiving, keep renewing, and keep living by the moral they had finally embraced together. And that brings us to the end of today's story on TrueStory Vibes. Don't forget to leave a comment with a quote or moment that touched you the most. Your words give our team the motivation to keep creating more heartfelt stories. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again soon.